space warfare satellites that can blind, hack, and destroy in orbit. Space warfare is combat in which one or more belligerents are in outer space. The scope of space warfare includes ground-to-space warfare, such as attacking satellites from the Earth, space-to-space warfare, such as satellites attacking satellites, and space-to-ground warfare, such as satellites attacking Earth-based targets. There exist international treaties, which are in place to attempt to regulate conflicts in space and limit the installation of space weapon systems, especially nuclear weapons. On October 31, 2023, during a Yemeni missile strike on Israel, Israel's Arrow 2 system intercepted a ballistic missile launch from Yemen by Houthi rebels. This successful interception occurred outside of Earth's atmosphere, thus making it the first recorded practical instance of space warfare during an active conflict. 2. On April 14, 2024, Iran launched more than 120 ballistic missiles at Israel, making it the first large-scale incident in which a space weapon was used. 3. From 1985 to 2002, there was a United States Space Command, which in 2002 merged with the United States Strategic Command, leaving the United States Space Force, formerly Air Force Space Command, until 2019 as the primary American military space force. The Russian Space Force, established on August 10, 1992, which became an independent section of the Russian Armed Forces on June 1, 2001, was replaced by the Russian Aerospace Defense Forces starting December 1, 2011, but was re-established as a component of the Russian Aerospace Forces on August 1, 2015. In 2019, India conducted a test of the ASAT missile. This made out the fourth country with that capability. In April of the same year, the Indian Armed Forces established the Defense Space Agency. 1950s. During the early Cold War, a survivable reconnaissance asset was considered highly valuable. In a time before satellites, this meant building an aircraft that could fly higher or faster, or both, compared to any interceptor that would try to bring it down. Notably, the United States would introduce the U-2 spy plane in 1956. It was thought, at the time of its introduction, that the plane's service ceiling of 24,000 meters, 80,000 feet, would render it immune to Soviet aircraft, missiles, and radar. That was the case until the 1960 U-2 incident, where a United States U-2 spy plane was shot down by the Soviet Air Defense Forces S-75 Dvina SA-2 guideline, surface-to-air missile while conducting photographic aerial reconnaissance deep inside Soviet territory. 3 years before the incident, in 1957, a modified R-7 rocket carried the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, into an orbit hundreds of kilometers above sea level, notably beyond the reach of any existing weapons system. While Sputnik 1 held no military value, only transmitting radio signals back to Earth for 3 weeks, its launch sparked the beginning of the space race. This spurred the United States to hasten and re-emphasize its space programs, culminating in the Explorer program, which launched the first American satellite into orbit in 1958. In tandem with the effort to achieve superior spaceflight capability over the other, the United States and the Soviet Union began to develop space warfare capabilities. 1960s. Early efforts to conduct space warfare were directed at space-to-space warfare, as ground-to-space systems were considered to be too slow and too isolated by Earth's atmosphere and gravity to be effective at the time. The history of active space warfare development goes back to the 1960s when the Soviet Union began the Almaz project, a project designed to give them the ability to do on-orbit inspections of satellites and destroy them if needed. Similar planning in the United States took the form of the Blue Gemini project, which consisted of modified Gemini capsules that would be able to deploy weapons and perform surveillance. One early test of electronic space warfare, the so-called Starfish Prime test, took place in 1962 when the United States exploded a ground-launched nuclear weapon in space to test the effects of an electromagnetic pulse. The result was a deactivation of many then-orbiting satellites, both American and Soviet. The deleterious and unfocused effects of the EMP test led to the banning of nuclear weapons in space in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. See high-altitude nuclear explosion. In the early 1960s, the U.S. military produced a film called Space and National Security which depicted space warfare. 4. 1970s, 1990s. A USAF F-15 Eagle launching an ASM-135 anti-satellite missile in 1985. Through the 1970s, the Soviet Union continued their project and test-fired a cannon to test space station defense. This was considered too dangerous to do with a crew on board, however, so the test was conducted after the crew had returned to Earth. A 1976 Soviet report suggested that the design of the space shuttle had been guided by a requirement to deliver a payload, such as a bomb, over Russia and return to land after a single orbit. This may have been a confusion based on requirements 3A and 3B for the shuttle's design, which required the craft to be able to deploy or retrieve an object from a polar orbit in a single pass. 5. Both the Soviets and the United States developed anti-satellite weaponry designed to shoot down satellites. While early efforts paralleled other space-to-space warfare concepts, the United States was able in the 1980s to develop ground-to-space laser anti-satellite weapons. None of these systems are known to be active today. However, a less powerful civilian version of the ground-to-space laser system is commonly used in the astronomical technique of adaptive optics. In 1984, the Strategic Defense Initiative (SDI) was proposed. It was nicknamed Star Wars after the popular science fiction franchise Star Wars. In 1985, the United States demonstrated its conventional ASAT capabilities by launching an ASM-135 ASAT from an F-15 to shoot down the Solwind P-78-1, an American research satellite, from its 555-kilometer, 345 miles, orbit. Since 2000, launch of an interceptor derived from Indian Ballistic Missile Defense Program for a SAT test on March 27, 2019. The People's Republic of China successfully tested, see 2007 Chinese anti-satellite missile test, a ballistic missile-launched anti-satellite weapon on January 11, 2007. This resulted in harsh criticism from the United States of America, Britain, and Japan. The U.S. developed an interceptor missile, the SM-3, testing it by hitting ballistic test targets while they were in space. On February 21, 2008, the U.S. used an SM-3 missile to destroy a spy satellite, USA-193, while it was 247 kilometers, 133 nautical miles, above the Pacific Ocean. Japan fields the U.S.-made SM-3 missile, and there have been plans to base the land-based version in Romania and Vietnam. Citation needed. In March 2019, India shot down a satellite orbiting in a low Earth orbit using an ASAT missile during an operation code named Mission Shakti 10, thus making its way to the list of space warfare nations, establishing the Defense Space Agency the following month, followed by its first-ever simulated space warfare exercise on July 25, which would inform a joint military space doctrine. In July 2019, Emmanuel Macron called for a Space High Command to protect France's satellites. This was followed by a plan released by military officials. French Defense Minister, Florence Parly, announced a space weapons program that would move the country's space surveillance strategy.